The steel beneath your feet has been walked upon by 10,000 generations of the faithful, yet you would never know their names. In the vast honeycomb of hive Tertius, on the industrial world of Corvinus Prime, there exists a single hab unit designated 77 Alpha 998. It measures 12 meters by 8 meters by 3 meters high. Within these dimensions, a family of 4 has lived for 37 years. The walls are painted the regulation ochre that the administratum determined, through careful calculation, would promote both productivity and compliance. The paint has begun to peel. This is the story of Matthias Volk, manufactorum worker grade 7, husband to Sarah, father to twins Castor and Lydia. His life unfolds in these cramped quarters where the ceiling pipes carry scalding water to the nobles in the spire above, where the floor thrums constantly with the vibrations of heavy machinery 15 levels below, where the walls sometimes seem to breathe when the lights flicker off. Matthias has lived in 77 Alpha 998 since birth. His father lived here before him, his grandfather before that. The lease, stamped and restamped by generations of minor clerks, bears the imperial aquila and the seal of the planetary governor. It guarantees occupancy in perpetuity, so long as the tithe quotas are met, so long as the work continues, so long as faith endures. The morning begins as it always begins. The hab unit's single chronometer, a brass device older than anyone can remember, chimes 6 times. The sound is thin and metallic, barely audible over the constant hum of the ventilation system that carries with it the smell of promethium, recycled air, and something else. Something that Matthias has noticed growing stronger over the past months. Something organic and wrong. Sarah rises first. She is 42 years old, though the perpetual dim lighting and recycled air have aged her beyond her years. Her hands are stained permanently with the blue-green chemicals from the textile mill where she operates loom 777, 13 hours a day, 6 days a week. On the 7th day, she attends mandatory services at the local shrine where Preacher Hanks reads from the same passages of the Imperial Creed that have echoed through these corridors for centuries. The words speak of the Emperor's love, of humanity's destiny among the stars, of the great work that must be completed. Sarah mouths along silently, her lips cracked from the dry, processed air. The twins, now 17, sleep on fold-out cots that transform the main living space into their bedroom each night. Castor works the 3rd shift at the plasma conduit maintenance bay. Lydia packages ration bars in the nutrition processing center. Both positions were assigned to them on their 16th birthday by the local administratum official, a pale man with wire-rimmed spectacles who consulted a series of charts and declared their fates with the indifference of someone reading atmospheric pressure. Neither child has ever left sub-level gamma. Neither has seen natural sunlight. Neither knows that such a thing exists. Matthias dresses in the regulation gray jumpsuit that marks him as a manufactorum worker. The fabric is rough against his skin, designed more for durability than comfort. Comfort is not a concept that factors into imperial manufacturing doctrine. Efficiency is paramount, compliance is essential. Comfort is a luxury that breeds weakness, and weakness breeds heresy. He clips his identification tag to his breast pocket. The tag bears his image, taken 23 years ago when he first reported for duty. The young man in the photograph looks optimistic. The Matthias who faces the mirror each morning no longer recognizes that expression. The kitchen consists of a single counter, a protein synthesizer, and a water reclamation unit. The synthesizer produces 3 types of food paste: gray, brown, and yellow. The gray paste provides basic nutrients. The brown paste is fortified with synthetic proteins. The yellow paste is supplemented with vitamins that prevent the worst diseases associated with artificial nutrition. All 3 taste exactly the same. The water reclamation unit converts waste liquids into potable water through a process that Matthias does not understand and does not question. Understanding is not required, only consumption. Breakfast is consumed in silence. This is not due to any animosity between family members, but rather because conversation has become increasingly difficult. What is there to discuss? The work does not change. The quotas do not change. The regulations do not change. Yesterday was identical to today, and tomorrow will be identical to yesterday. This is the great gift of imperial society, the elimination of uncertainty. Every citizen knows their place, their purpose, their value to the greater machine. There is comfort in this knowledge, Preacher Hanks tells them during services. There is peace in acceptance. But Matthias has begun to notice things that disturb this peace. It started 3 months ago with the sound, a scratching noise that seemed to come from within the walls themselves. At first, he attributed it to the building's age. 77 Alpha 998 is part of a residential complex that was constructed during the 38th millennium. The structural reports, reviewed annually by the appropriate authorities, indicate that the building remains sound and suitable for habitation. Load-bearing walls maintain their integrity. Electrical systems function within acceptable parameters. Plumbing delivers adequate water pressure. The scratching, Matthias reasoned, must be the natural settling of ancient metal and rockcrete. Then came the whispers. Late at night, when Sarah and the twins sleep deeply from exhaustion, Matthias lies awake listening to the familiar sounds of the HAB unit. The gurgling of pipes overhead, the distant thrum of machinery below, the occasional footsteps in the corridor outside. But now there are new sounds, soft voices speaking words he cannot quite make out. They seem to originate from behind the wall that separates the living area from HAB Unit 77 Alpha 997, where the Korvac family has lived for 19 years. But the timing is wrong. The Korvacs work the second shift and should be sleeping during the hours when Matthias hears the whispers. He has considered reporting this to the local administratum office. Form 777 Delta allows residents to file complaints regarding noise disturbances. The process is straightforward. Complete the form in triplicate, submit it to the appropriate clerk, wait for investigation and resolution. But something holds him back. Perhaps it is the knowledge that investigation often leads to relocation, and relocation means separation from the only home his family has ever known. Perhaps it is the fear that the investigators might find something worse than noise violations. Perhaps it is simply the imperial citizens' instinctive understanding that some things are better left uninvestigated. The wall in question is painted the same regulation ochre as all the others. It bears the same minor scuffs and stains that accumulate over decades of habitation. There is nothing visually distinctive about it, except for a small crack near the ceiling that Matthias does not remember being there before. The crack is perhaps 15 centimeters long and barely visible unless one knows where to look. When Matthias positions his ear near the crack, the whispers become slightly clearer, though the words remain incomprehensible. Work provides a temporary escape from these concerns. The manufactorum where Matthias labors occupies 7 sublevels beneath the residential complex. The journey requires a 20-minute descent through a series of lift platforms and connecting tunnels. The tunnels are lined with service pipes, electrical conduits, and ventilation shafts that disappear into darkness. Occasionally, maintenance crews can be seen working in the deeper reaches, their headlamps creating brief pools of light in the perpetual gloom. Matthias has never spoken to these maintenance workers. Their schedules do not align with his, and conversation between different work classifications is discouraged without proper authorization. The manufactorum floor spans 2 kilometers in length and 1 kilometer in width. The ceiling rises 20 meters above the workstations, supported by massive steel beams that cast geometric shadows across the production line. The air is thick with the smell of heated metal, machine lubricants, and ozone from the plasma cutters. The noise is constant and overwhelming, the rhythmic pounding of hydraulic presses, the whine of cutting tools, the hiss of cooling systems. Workers communicate through hand signals and abbreviated shouts. Extended conversation is impossible. Matthias operates Assembly Station 47, where he installs guidance systems into artillery shells destined for the Imperial Guard. Each shell is identical to the last. Each requires the same sequence of operations performed in the same precise order. Insert the guidance module, align the connectors, apply the sealant, activate the diagnostic sequence. Pass the completed shell to the next station. The work requires concentration but not creativity. Creativity is discouraged. Deviation from established procedures results in immediate quality control review and potential disciplinary action. The shells Matthias works on will be fired from basilisk artillery platforms on distant worlds whose names he will never know. They will explode among enemies whose faces he will never see. The fragments will kill soldiers whose final thoughts will be of homes they will never see again. This knowledge does not trouble Matthias. It is not meant to trouble him. His role in the great chain of Imperial production is small but essential. Without his work, the shells would not function. Without the shells, the artillery would be useless. Without the artillery, worlds would fall to Xenos aggression or heretical rebellion. Without the Emperor's protection, humanity would perish in the darkness between the stars. This is the logic that governs every action, every decision, every moment of existence within the Imperium. The work shift ends as it begins, with the sound of a chronometer. 12 hours after beginning their labors, the workers of the Manufactorum set down their tools and begin the journey home. The lift platforms carry them upward through the same tunnels they descended in the morning. The transition from the bright, harsh lighting of the production floor to the dim, amber illumination of the residential levels requires several minutes of adjustment. Some workers rub their eyes, others blink repeatedly. Matthias simply stares ahead, his mind already focused on the evening routine that awaits him. Dinner is prepared by Sarah, who returns from the textile mill 30 minutes before Matthias arrives home. The meal consists of protein paste supplemented with synthesized vegetables and a small portion of carbohydrate supplement. The vegetables are grown in hydroponic facilities 3 levels below the residential complex. They are pale and flavorless, engineered for nutritional content rather than taste. The workers who tend these facilities are classified as agricultural specialists and receive slightly larger rations as compensation for their critical role in food production. Sarah has sometimes wondered what it would be like to work in the growing facilities, surrounded by living plants instead of mechanical looms. But wondering is not the same as requesting transfer, and transfer requests require justification that goes beyond personal preference. Castor returns from his shift as the family finishes eating. His work in the plasma conduit maintenance bay exposes him to radiation levels that are within acceptable parameters but leave him perpetually exhausted. His skin has taken on a pale, translucent quality that makes the veins in his forearms visible. The medical clinic provides monthly screenings for all plasma workers. The results are filed with the appropriate authorities, but not shared with the workers themselves. Castor knows only that he has been cleared for continued duty. This is sufficient information for his purposes. Lydia's shift at the Nutrition Processing Center ends after the others have gone to sleep. She returns to the HAB unit near midnight, moving quietly to avoid waking the family. Her work involves sealing individual ration packages and applying the appropriate labels. The labels indicate nutritional content, expiration dates, and distribution designations. Some packages are marked for general consumption. Others are labeled for specific populations: children, pregnant women, workers in hazardous industries, clergy members, military personnel. The ration quality varies according to the recipient's value to Imperial society. This variation is not discussed openly, but every citizen understands the hierarchy through direct experience. The evening hours in 77 Alpha 998 follow an established pattern. Sarah performs maintenance tasks, cleaning the synthesizer filters, checking the water reclamation unit, inspecting the HAB unit for signs of wear or damage. Matthias reviews work documentation, filling out production reports and quality control forms. The twins study technical manuals related to their respective positions, memorizing safety protocols and efficiency standards. Education in the traditional sense ended for all of them years ago, but continuous training is mandatory for all imperial citizens. Knowledge that does not serve the Emperor's purposes is knowledge wasted. But tonight, as Matthias attempts to focus on his documentation, the whispers return. They begin as they always begin, soft and indistinct, seeming to emerge from the very walls themselves. But tonight there is something different. Tonight the whispers seem to carry a note of urgency, almost pleading. Matthias sets aside his data slate and moves closer to the wall. Sarah, absorbed in her cleaning tasks, does not notice his movement. Castor has already fallen asleep on his cot, his breathing shallow and labored from radiation exposure. Placing his ear against the wall, Matthias listens intently. The whispers are definitely coming from behind the surface, but their source remains unclear. They could be originating from HAB Unit 77 Alpha 997, but the Korvac family consists of only 3 members: Hendrik, his wife Elena, and their daughter Mira. The voices Matthias hears seem to be more numerous, perhaps 6 or 7 distinct speakers. Their words overlap and interweave in patterns that make individual phrases difficult to distinguish. The crack in the wall has grown. Where it was once 15 centimeters long, it now extends nearly 30 centimeters toward the floor. The edges of the crack are not the clean breaks one would expect from structural settling. Instead, they appear almost organic, curved and irregular like the branches of a diseased tree. When Matthias runs his finger along the crack, the surface feels warm to the touch. This should not be possible. The interior walls are not connected to any heating systems, and the ambient temperature of the HAB unit remains constant at 18 degrees Celsius. Over the following weeks, Matthias begins to observe other changes in 77 Alpha 998. The protein synthesizer occasionally produces batches of paste that smell faintly of decay. The water from the reclamation unit sometimes carries a metallic taste that lingers for hours. The chronometer, which has maintained perfect accuracy for decades, begins to run slow, losing several minutes each day. Most disturbing of all, Sarah and the twins seem not to notice these anomalies. When Matthias mentions the strange smells or unusual tastes, they look at him with confusion and mild concern. The work continues, as it always continues. The manufactorum operates according to schedules established by the administratum and enforced by shift supervisors, who themselves answer to production coordinators who report to sector chiefs who serve at the pleasure of the planetary governor. The chain of command extends upward through layers of bureaucracy until it reaches the highest levels of imperial authority. At each level, decisions are made based on data provided by the level below. Information flows upward, filtered and processed and condensed into reports that bear little resemblance to the reality experienced by individual workers. Assembly Station 47 continues to produce guidance systems for artillery shells. The quota remains constant, 47 units per shift. The quality standards remain unchanged, 0 tolerance for defects or deviations. The work rhythm remains steady: insert, align, seal, test, pass. But Matthias finds his concentration wavering. His thoughts return repeatedly to the whispers, to the growing crack, to the changes in his home that no one else seems to perceive. The shift supervisor, a thin woman named Velka who has held her position for 8 years, notices Matthias's distraction during the 3rd week. She approaches his station during a scheduled inspection, her data slate ready to record any observations or violations. "Worker Volk," she says, her voice barely audible over the machinery noise. "Your completion rate has dropped by 7% over the past 10 days. Matthias continues working as he responds. Stopping to face a supervisor during inspection is considered disrespectful and can result in disciplinary action. "I was not aware of the decline, Supervisor Velka. I will increase my focus to correct the deficiency." Production standards exist for the benefit of the Emperor and the citizens he protects. Velka continues. When one worker fails to meet quota, all workers must compensate for the shortfall. This creates inefficiency and reduces overall output. I understand, Supervisor. The deficiency will be corrected. Velka makes notes on her data slate. These notes will become part of Matthias's permanent work record, accessible to any future supervisor or administrator who needs to evaluate his performance. 3 negative evaluations within a 6-month period result in mandatory re-education. 5 negative evaluations result in job reassignment. 7 negative evaluations result in review by the local arbitrator, whose options include fines, imprisonment, or in extreme cases, servitorization. The knowledge of this system does not inspire fear in Imperial citizens. Fear would suggest doubt about the wisdom of Imperial justice. Instead, it inspires careful attention to duty and regulation compliance. Matthias has received only 2 negative evaluations during his 23 years of service, both for minor infractions related to documentation errors. His work record is considered exemplary by Manufactorum standards. This recent decline in performance represents an anomaly that requires correction. But correction proves difficult when one's attention is constantly drawn to mysteries that should not exist. The whispers have begun to occur during daylight hours. What once was a nighttime phenomenon now intrudes into the normal routine of home life. Matthias hears them while eating breakfast, while preparing for work, while attempting to complete his evening documentation. The voices seem to be calling to him specifically, though the words remain incomprehensible. Sometimes he catches fragments that sound almost like his name, drawn out and distorted as if spoken through water or thick glass. Sarah has begun to express concern about his behavior. During their brief evening conversations, she mentions his tendency to stare at walls, his distraction during meals, his habit of pressing his ear to surfaces as if listening for something. Her concern is genuine but limited. Imperial citizens are not trained in psychological analysis or mental health assessment. Such training is reserved for medical specialists and clergy members who serve specific functions within the imperial hierarchy. Sarah knows only that her husband's behavior has changed, and change without apparent cause is always troubling. "Perhaps you should speak with Preacher Hanks," she suggests one evening as they prepare for sleep. He has experience counseling workers who suffer from spiritual difficulties. The suggestion is reasonable. Preacher Hanks has served the local shrine for 12 years and has guided many citizens through periods of doubt or confusion. His approach combines scriptural wisdom with practical advice, helping troubled souls reconcile their personal struggles with their imperial duties. But Matthias is reluctant to involve religious authority in what may be a purely practical matter. Preacher Hanks is required by regulation to report certain types of problems to higher authorities. Spiritual corruption, heretical thoughts, signs of mutation or psychic manifestation all fall under his mandatory reporting requirements. "I will consider your suggestion," Matthias tells Sarah, "but I believe the difficulty will resolve itself with time." This is not entirely truthful. Matthias does not believe the difficulty will resolve itself. If anything, he suspects it will continue to intensify. The crack in the wall grows longer each day. The whispers become more frequent and more urgent. The changes in his home environment become more pronounced. But admitting these concerns to Sarah would only spread the disturbance to another family member, and Matthias is not certain that would be wise. The solution, he decides, is investigation. The decision to investigate does not come easily. Imperial citizens are trained from birth to report unusual phenomena to appropriate authorities rather than attempting independent analysis. The chain of reporting is clearly defined. Citizens report to local administrators, administrators report to sector coordinators, coordinators report to planetary officials, officials report to subsector commands, commands report to imperial governors. At each level, specialized expertise is applied to determine appropriate responses. This system has functioned effectively for 10,000 years, maintaining stability across millions of worlds and trillions of citizens. But the system assumes that citizens will recognize unusual phenomena when they encounter them. Matthias is not certain that what he is experiencing qualifies as unusual. The whispers could be explained by acoustic effects in the building's aging structure. The growing crack could result from normal settling or thermal expansion. The changes in taste and smell could be attributed to minor equipment malfunctions or his own heightened sensitivity due to stress. Without clear evidence of a genuine threat, reporting his concerns might be premature and could result in unnecessary investigation of his family and neighbors. The investigation begins with careful observation. Matthias starts documenting the whispers, their timing, duration, apparent source location, and any words or phrases he can distinguish. He measures the crack in the wall each evening, noting its growth rate and changing characteristics. He monitors the protein synthesizer and water reclamation unit, recording any variations in output quality. His approach is methodical and systematic, following the analytical principles taught to all manufactorum workers for quality control purposes. The documentation reveals patterns that disturb him. The whispers occur most frequently between 2200 hours and 0200 hours, during the period when most residents are sleeping. The crack grows at a rate of approximately 2 centimeters per day, but the growth accelerates during the whisper episodes. The equipment malfunctions correlate with both the whispers and the crack growth, suggesting a connection between all three phenomena. Most troubling of all, Matthias discovers that he can sometimes understand individual words within the whispers. They speak of hunger, of darkness, of spaces between spaces where the Emperor's light does not reach. They mention names that sound almost familiar but which he cannot quite place. They describe places that seem to exist within the walls themselves, vast caverns and twisted corridors that extend far beyond the physical boundaries of the residential complex. This is when Matthias realizes that his situation may require more than individual investigation. The local administratum office occupies the third sub-level of the government complex, 12 levels above the residential areas but still far below the spire where the highest planetary officials conduct their business. The office serves citizens from 7 residential sectors, processing their documentation needs, complaint reports, and administrative requests. The waiting area contains 40 seats arranged in neat rows, facing a service counter manned by 3 clerks. The seats are occupied by citizens holding various forms and documents, each waiting for their number to be called. Matthias holds complaint form 777 Delta, completed in triplicate as required by regulations. The form allows him to report noise disturbances, structural anomalies, equipment malfunctions, or other habitability issues within his assigned HAB unit. He has filled out the form carefully, describing the whispers as unusual acoustic phenomena, the crack as a minor structural irregularity, and the equipment problems as intermittent performance variations. The language is deliberately neutral and technical, avoiding any suggestions of supernatural or heretical causes. When his number is called, Matthias approaches the service counter where Clerk Valdris, a middle-aged man with thinning hair and ink-stained fingers, reviews his documentation. HAB Unit 77 Alpha 998. Clerk Valdris reads aloud. Acoustic phenomena, structural irregularity, equipment variations. How long have these issues been ongoing? Approximately 6 weeks for the acoustic phenomena, 4 weeks for the structural issue, 3 weeks for the equipment problems. Clerk Valdris makes notes on his data slate. Have you consulted with your neighbors regarding similar experiences? This is a standard question, designed to determine whether reported problems affect multiple units or represent isolated incidents. Matthias has not consulted with his neighbors. The Korvac family in 77 Alpha 997 work different shifts, and he rarely encounters them in the corridors. The Brennis family in 77 Alpha 999 consists of an elderly couple who keep to themselves and communicate primarily through written notes left outside their HAB unit. I have not consulted with neighbors, Matthias replies. Investigation protocol requires neighbor consultation before administrative review. Clerk Valdris explains. Please complete verification form 222 alpha with statements from adjacent residents, then return for processing. The additional form requires Matthias to obtain written statements from residents of HAB Units 77 Alpha 997 and 77 Alpha 999, confirming whether they have experienced similar problems. The statements must be signed and dated, with official identification numbers included for verification purposes. Only then can the administratum proceed with formal investigation of his complaint. This requirement presents complications that Matthias did not anticipate. Approaching neighbors about potentially sensitive matters requires careful consideration of privacy regulations and social protocols. Citizens are expected to maintain appropriate boundaries with their neighbors while still cooperating in matters of mutual concern. The balance between these expectations is delicate, and miscalculation can result in social difficulties or administrative complications. The decision to approach the Korvac family proves problematic from the outset. Matthias knocks on the door of 77 Alpha 997 during the evening hours when he believes they should be home from their second shift assignments. The knock is answered not by Hendrik or Elena Korvac, but by a young woman he does not recognize. She appears to be in her 20s, with pale skin and dark hair pulled back in a simple braid. Her clothing is standard civilian issue, but something about her manner suggests she is not a regular resident of the complex. "Yes?" she asks, opening the door only wide enough to reveal her face. "I am Matthias Volk from 77 Alpha 998. I am seeking to speak with the Korvac family regarding an administrative matter." The young woman's expression does not change, but she glances briefly over her shoulder before responding. "The Korvacs are not available at this time. Perhaps you could return at a more convenient hour." This response is unusual. Citizens working second shift should be available during evening hours, and administrative matters typically receive priority attention regardless of convenience. Matthias considers pressing for more specific information about when the Korvacs might be available, but something in the young woman's manner discourages further inquiry. "May I ask when would be a more convenient time?" he asks instead. "I will inform them of your visit," she replies. "They will contact you if they wish to discuss the matter." The door closes before Matthias can respond. He stands in the corridor for several moments, considering the implications of this encounter. The young woman could be a visiting relative or friend, though such visits typically require advance registration with building management. She could be a temporary resident assigned to the unit for official purposes, though such assignments are usually announced to neighboring units for security reasons. Or she could be someone who should not be in the building at all. The encounter with the Brennis family proves equally unsatisfactory, though for different reasons. When Matthias knocks on the door of 77 Alpha 999, he is greeted by Marcus Brennis, an elderly man whose work history includes 25 years in the atmospheric processing plant before his current assignment to document filing duties. Marcus listens politely to Matthias's explanation of the administrative requirement, but his response reveals complications. "Unusual sounds, you say?" Marcus asks, his voice carrying a note of concern. "Elena and I have noticed some irregularities in our own unit, primarily related to temperature fluctuations and occasional electrical anomalies." This information is both helpful and troubling. Helpful because it suggests that Matthias's experiences may not be isolated to his own HAB unit. Troubling because it implies a broader problem that could affect the entire residential complex. Marcus agrees to provide a written statement for the verification form, but his willingness to cooperate comes with an unexpected request. "Perhaps we should coordinate our efforts," Marcus suggests. "If multiple units are experiencing problems, a joint complaint might receive more serious attention from the administratum." The suggestion is reasonable from an efficiency standpoint, but it represents a significant expansion of what Matthias originally intended as a simple individual complaint. Joint complaints require additional documentation, coordination between multiple families, and potentially greater scrutiny from administrative authorities. They also imply a level of organization among residents that could be interpreted as unauthorized assembly for collective action. Imperial regulations regarding collective action are complex and situation-dependent. Citizens have the right to band together for legitimate purposes such as work assignments, religious observance, and community maintenance. But they also have the obligation to avoid unauthorized organization that could challenge established authority or create alternative power structures. The distinction between legitimate cooperation and unauthorized assembly is not always clear, and citizens are expected to exercise judgment in determining appropriate levels of coordination. After careful consideration, Matthias agrees to Marcus's suggestion. The potential benefits of a coordinated approach outweigh the risks, particularly if the problems affecting his HAB unit are indeed part of a larger pattern. Marcus's experience with administrative procedures, gained through his document filing work, could prove valuable in navigating the complaint process. His willingness to cooperate also suggests that the problems are significant enough to warrant formal attention. The joint complaint requires 3 days to prepare properly. Marcus and Matthias meet each evening after their work shifts to compare their observations and compile their documentation. The meetings take place in the corridor outside their respective HAB units, as regulations discourage extended visits between families without proper authorization. Their conversations are conducted in low voices to avoid disturbing other residents, though Matthias notices that the corridor seems unusually empty during their meeting times. The documentation that emerges from their collaboration reveals a pattern more disturbing than either man initially suspected. Marcus's electrical anomalies correspond closely to the timing of Matthias's whispers. Both families have experienced equipment malfunctions that follow similar patterns. Most significantly, Marcus reports structural irregularities in his own HAB unit, a crack in the wall that separates his living area from 77 Alpha 998. The crack in Marcus's wall is approximately 45 centimeters long, extending from floor level toward the ceiling. Like the crack in Matthias's wall, it exhibits organic-looking curves rather than straight structural breaks. Marcus has measured its growth rate and discovered that it expands at approximately 2 centimeters per day, the same rate that Matthias has documented in his own unit. The correlation is too precise to be coincidental. But the most disturbing discovery comes when Marcus describes sounds that he has been hearing from within the wall. They are not whispers like those experienced by Matthias, but rather a rhythmic scratching noise accompanied by what sounds like breathing. The sounds occur during the same time periods as Matthias's whispers, suggesting that both phenomena originate from the same source located somewhere between the two HAB units. This raises troubling questions about the nature of the space between the walls. According to the building's architectural plans, available for review at the local administratum office, the walls of adjacent HAB units are separated by 15 centimeters of insulation material and structural support elements. This space is not designed to accommodate any form of activity or habitation. It exists purely for building integrity and environmental isolation between units. Yet the sounds reported by both men suggest the presence of something within this space. Something that moves, breathes, and possibly speaks. Something that should not exist according to any reasonable understanding of the building's design and function. The joint complaint, completed in the required quintuplicate format, represents the most thorough documentation either man has ever submitted to administrative authority. It includes detailed measurements, time logs, correlation analysis, and supporting statements from both families. The language remains carefully neutral and technical, avoiding any implications of supernatural or heretical causes. The request is simple: investigation by qualified authorities and appropriate remedial action to restore normal habitability conditions. Clerk Valdris reviews the joint complaint with visible interest. The thoroughness of the documentation clearly impresses him, and he asks several detailed questions about measurement methodology and observational procedures. His questions suggest professional curiosity rather than skepticism, and Matthias begins to hope that their complaint will receive serious attention. This type of coordinated documentation is exceptional, Clerk Valdris comments as he reviews the final pages. Most citizen complaints lack sufficient detail for proper evaluation. Your approach demonstrates admirable dedication to administrative efficiency. The praise is gratifying, but Matthias remains focused on practical outcomes. What is the expected timeline for investigation and resolution? Standard protocol requires initial assessment within 10 working days, Valdris explains. Depending on the findings, additional investigation may be required. Complex structural or environmental issues sometimes require specialist consultation, which can extend the process considerably. 10 working days represents 2 full work weeks, during which the problems in both HAB units will presumably continue to develop. The cracks will grow larger, the sounds will become more frequent, and whatever exists in the space between the walls will have additional time to establish itself more firmly. This timeline is not ideal, but it represents the best outcome available through official channels. As Matthias and Marcus leave the administratum office, both men understand that they have committed themselves to a process whose conclusion remains uncertain. Their joint complaint has been filed and accepted, but official investigation may reveal problems that require solutions beyond simple maintenance or repair. If the issues in their HAB units are connected to larger structural problems, they could face relocation to different residential areas. If the problems are attributed to equipment age or design flaws, they could face assessments for upgrade costs that exceed their financial resources. Most troubling of all, if the investigation reveals problems that cannot be explained through conventional means, they could face questioning about their own role in creating or discovering these problems. Imperial authorities are trained to consider all possibilities when evaluating unusual circumstances, including the possibility that citizens reporting problems may themselves be part of the problem. But these concerns must be balanced against the certainty that ignoring the growing problems will only make them worse. The whispers in Matthias's wall have become more frequent and more urgent. The cracks in both units continue to expand. The equipment malfunctions have begun to affect the quality of food and water that both families depend upon for survival. Whatever is happening in 77 Alpha 998 and 77 Alpha 999 cannot be allowed to continue indefinitely. The investigation, when it begins, reveals the true scope of the problem. Administrative investigator Teresa Vance arrives at the residential complex on the morning of the 8th working day after the complaint was filed. She is accompanied by Building Inspector Jonas Kreiber and Technical Specialist Lisa Morrison, indicating that the administratum has taken the joint complaint seriously enough to assign a full investigation team. The team carries specialized equipment for structural assessment, environmental analysis, and documentation of their findings. Matthias and Marcus meet the investigation team in the corridor outside their respective HAB units. Both men have taken leave from their work assignments for the day, as their presence is required for the full duration of the investigation. The loss of a day's wages represents a financial hardship for both families, but cooperation with official investigations is mandatory and takes precedence over individual economic concerns. Investigator Vance begins the process by reviewing the joint complaint and asking detailed questions about the timeline and nature of each reported problem. Her questions are professional and thorough, covering aspects of the situation that neither Matthias nor Marcus had considered significant. She asks about changes in sleep patterns, variations in appetite, any unusual dreams or thoughts that might correlate with the onset of problems. Her questions suggest experience with cases that extend beyond simple structural or equipment issues. The physical investigation begins with Inspector Kreiber's assessment of the cracks in both HAB units. Using precision measuring instruments, he confirms the dimensions and growth rates documented by the residents. But his examination reveals additional details that were not visible to untrained observation. The cracks do not follow the normal patterns associated with structural settling or thermal expansion. Instead, they appear to follow the path of least resistance through the wall material, creating curved channels that maximize surface area while minimizing structural damage. This is not typical crack propagation, Inspector Kreiber explains to the team. The pattern suggests external pressure applied from within the wall space, but the building specifications indicate no surfaces or structural elements that could generate such pressure. Technical specialist Morrison begins her environmental analysis with readings from instruments that Matthias does not recognize. She measures air composition, temperature gradients, electromagnetic fields, and acoustic signatures throughout both HAB units. Her equipment produces a series of soft beeping sounds and displays data on small screens that she studies with growing concentration. Atmospheric anomalies in both units, Morrison reports after completing her initial survey, elevated humidity levels inconsistent with building environmental controls, trace organic compounds of unknown origin, low-frequency acoustic emissions that do not correlate with any mechanical systems in the building. The investigation team exchanges glances that suggest these findings are not entirely unexpected. Investigator Vance makes detailed notes on her data slate while Inspector Kreiber photographs the cracks from multiple angles. Morrison continues her readings, moving methodically through both HAB units with her instruments. It is Morrison who discovers the most disturbing evidence. Using a fiber optic probe inserted into the crack in Matthias's wall, she is able to examine the interior space between the HAB units. What she sees there contradicts every assumption about the building's construction and occupancy. The space between the walls is not the narrow gap filled with insulation material shown on the architectural plans. Instead, it opens into a cavity that extends far beyond the building's documented dimensions. The interior space appears to be significantly larger than indicated by construction records. Morrison reports, her voice carrying a note of professional concern. I'm detecting air movement consistent with a much more extensive hollow area. The probe is encountering no resistance after 2 meters of extension, which should be impossible given the building's structural design. Investigator Vance requests a more detailed probe examination. Morrison inserts additional equipment into the crack, including a miniature camera that can transmit images back to her monitoring screen. The images that appear on the screen show a space that defies rational explanation. The cavity extends upward and downward beyond the range of the camera's illumination. The walls are not the clean metal and rockcrete surfaces one would expect from construction materials, but rather appear organic in nature, with textures that seem to shift and change when observed directly. The air within the space moves in patterns that suggest ventilation or circulation, though no mechanical systems are visible. Most disturbing of all, the camera detects movement within the cavity, shadows that cross the field of view without apparent sources, shapes that seem almost recognizable before disappearing into the darkness. At one point, the camera captures what appears to be text or symbols carved into the organic wall surfaces, but the characters are not in any language that Morrison recognizes. I need to report these findings to Sector Command immediately, Investigator Vance announces after reviewing Morrison's documentation. This investigation exceeds the scope of standard habitability assessment. The implications of this statement are not lost on Matthias or Marcus. When administrative investigations exceed standard scope, they typically escalate to authorities with specialized expertise and enhanced legal powers. This could mean involvement by the ecclesiarchy if the problems are deemed to have spiritual implications. It could mean involvement by the Adeptus Mechanicus if the issues relate to technological heresy. It could even mean involvement by the Inquisition if the circumstances suggest corruption by Chaos or Xenos influence. While Investigator Vance communicates with her superiors via secured Vox link, Inspector Kreiber continues his structural assessment of both HAB units. His examination reveals that the anomalous cracks are not isolated to the walls between the units. Similar fissures, smaller but following the same organic patterns, have begun to appear in other locations throughout both residences. Floor-to-ceiling cracks near the entrance doors, ceiling-to-floor cracks along the exterior walls, horizontal cracks that follow the junction between walls and floors. The building, it appears, is developing a network of interconnected openings that correspond to no known structural phenomena. The cracks are not random damage from age or settling, but rather seem to follow a deliberate pattern that serves some unknown purpose. They are creating pathways through the solid structure of the building, connecting spaces that were never intended to be connected. Technical specialist Morrison's continued monitoring reveals that the environmental anomalies are spreading beyond the two HAB units under investigation. Her instruments detect similar atmospheric irregularities in adjacent residences, though the residents of those units have not reported problems to the administratum. This suggests either that the problems are in early stages in other locations, or that other residents are experiencing difficulties but have not yet sought official assistance. The investigation team